I seriously cannot wait for the new Call of Duty.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and as always you can find me on Twitter at redrock_bball. We are back with another of the season preview podcasts. I think we are at number 6 at the moment, so churning through those. And today we're going to head our attention back towards the Eastern Conference after a couple of shows in the Western Conference. So we're going to be talking about the Charlotte Hornets in today's show. And to talk about everything to do with the Charlotte Hornets, I am joined by the co-hosts of the Locked On Hornets podcast, David Walker and Doug Branson. David, start with you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us. Good to be here.
Doug, welcome back. So I think last year David wasn't on the show, but Doug, you were here. So welcome back to you.
Oh, thank you. I kind of prefer it that way, but that's okay. We'll deal with David as he comes.
Do I have to mediate you two here and just keep it civil?
As long as we don't talk about Twin Peaks, I think we'll be okay.
All right. Well, I'm not going to talk about Twin Peaks because I haven't even seen the original Twin Peaks yet, so I'm a long way behind on that. It is on my list of things to watch, but it's down there at the moment. So should I be watching it?
Oh yeah,
I think absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well maybe
I'll hurry though. Basketball season's coming.
Yeah, that's true. I don't have a huge amount of time. This is my TV time. I've been smashing through a lot of stuff, but maybe we'll put that up onto the list and get into that now. But we're not here to talk about Twin Peaks. This is not Locked On Twin Peaks. This is Locked On Fantasy Basketball, and we're going to be talking about the Charlotte Hornets in today's show. So what we're going to do is talk about the players who have arrived at the team, the players who have left, and talk about how things change and how that shakes out from a fantasy point of view. So, Doug, let's start with you. The biggest acquisition that the Hornets, I think, made this offseason, at least the splashiest, would be the trade for Dwight Howard, in which really they didn't give up much at all in order to get Dwight Howard. But as for Dwight, he's not the same Dwight that we saw winning multiple defensive players of the year back, in 2008, 2009, that sort of a time period. What do you think that Dwight can bring to the Hornets this season?
Well, I mean, he certainly thinks that he has the ability to recapture some of that magic that made him unstoppable in Orlando, at least in his comments to Woj there on ESPN. I think he views the past few years as a quote, mess. And in his mind, a lot of that has to do with situation, coaching, circumstance, and scheme. And I think he looks at head coach Steve Clifford as a way to sort of reclaim some of that because he feels like Clifford understands him in a way that maybe some of his former coaches did not. But Steve Clifford, on the other hand, quick to admit that post-back surgery in Los Angeles, Dwight, not quite the athlete he was in Orlando, and I think that bears itself out in the tape. And I think Clifford would know that more intimately than others because he got to coach him in Orlando and then again in Los Angeles. Bottom line, Dwight Howard averaged a double-double last season and was one of the best rebounders in the league. The Hornets were already a fantastic defensive rebounding team because that's what Steve Clifford demands. Now they're going to add his offensive rebounding ability. That won't require both, MKG and Zeller to tag team on the offensive boards. If they can send Dwight to the rim and let a guy like Michael Kidd-Gilchrist get back, I think that's going to improve the Charlotte Hornets defense tremendously and help them win close games, which I think is something that they weren't able to do last season, could completely turn their season around this year if he's able to help them just eke out 4 or 5 close wins.
In terms of what you said about him averaging a double-double last year, that's obviously correct. I think he can do that again this season. But the important thing to mention is what Clifford said about the lack of mobility after the back surgery and the knee problems that he's had. It really did show up, especially late last season in Atlanta. He was struggling defensively. He's nowhere near the same defensive presence as what he was. And I think both of you guys would agree that at this point he is going to be the starting center. But David, do you think that he should be, considering how well Cody Zeller played last year and how bad the Hornets were when he was off the court? Do you think there is any argument for these two to maybe be splitting minutes at that center position, or do you think it's just Howard all the way?
Well, I think what you said was right. At some point, it'll boil down to them splitting minutes to some degree. We've talked about this a lot, obviously, leading up to the season. and we've both settled on Dwight Howard starting. It's just hard to tell a player of Dwight's caliber and kind of the space he takes up, not just on the floor, but kind of in the locker room. You know what I mean? He's a dynamic personality. I don't think he would take to coming off the bench probably quite as well as I think Cody Zeller would. And honestly, we think this could be a benefit for both of these guys because we mentioned Dwight's, injury issues. Cody's had his own share of injury issues too. So I think balancing the minutes between those two could help them both in the long run. Now, how that bears out for them, statistically will be interesting. I think it could maybe diminish the impact that Cody has maybe overall. But like I said, going through the long run, helping them stay healthy will help. And Dwight Howard, you guys mentioned the double-doubles. He's done that every single year he's been in the league. And I certainly think the Hornets are looking for him to do that again. And I think that's where he can be a contributor. But, yeah, I mean, we think, starting him is probably going to be the best way to go. And then they'll figure out the minutes from there. But I think having Cody come off the bench is probably the way that they'll start it.
And to quickly add to that, Josh, I think that Cody Zeller has been accustomed to playing off the bench. He was one of the best pick and roll big men in the league last season, and this is a pick and roll heavy offense, both in the first unit and the second unit. So I think Cody Zeller probably more apt to going to that second unit and making an impact as opposed to Dwight Howard.
Yeah, I can totally see that in terms of personality-wise as well, being able to run that second year. But Zeller was extraordinarily important for this team last year, and we saw again how much they sucked when they had to put Frank Kaminsky in there at center. Yep. They went like 3-17, I believe, over those 20 games that Zeller missed. So he is an important part, and Howard's not going to play 82 games. We know that, so Zeller's going to start some games, but it does take him, in my opinion, out of fantasy calculations. His upside is limited. He'd need 30-plus minutes to be a solid fantasy contributor anyway, because he's not a huge stat stuffer. As for Howard, he doesn't need 30 minutes to be a fantasy contributor. He's a guy that you don't want anything to do with in rotisserie leagues, as I always say, because of that free throw percentage. But he shoots at such a high percentage from the field that makes him a really valuable guy. Block shots, decent steals, high rebound numbers, and he's not going to need big minutes to be a valuable piece who could be in the right situation, in a punt free throw situation, like a top 50 guy, even in a limited minutes situation alongside Zeller. So for as much as Howard gets shit on all over the place, which happens often, he is still going to be a decent fantasy contributor, and you can get him potentially at a discount in certain situations. Just make sure that if you are getting him, when you get him, it's the right thing for your team, because one misplaced drafting of Dwight Howard can completely screw up what you've done for the previous 6 or 7 rounds, and that's something that a lot of people do need to pay attention to. Now, Doug, the other guy that came across who's going to be a part of the rotation, Michael Carter-Williams, who struggled in Chicago with injuries, with coaching, with form. He comes in and slots straight into the backup point guard role, we would assume. He did play some off the ball in Chicago last year, mainly for his defense. How do you see Carter-Williams' role here now in Charlotte? Is he going to be playing primarily at backup point guard with Malik Monk around, or do you think they'll play maybe some Kemba and MCW lineups together?
I think you could very well see MCW and Kemba play together, because one of the priorities for that backup point guard position heading into this offseason was to find somebody that could play alongside Kemba, that had the size, the strength, the length to play with Kemba Walker. They missed that last season without Jeremy Lin, who we know had such an impact on this team in terms of not only his ability to light up the scoreboard, but also to play alongside Kemba. Now, MCW will certainly not be the scoring threat that Jeremy Lin was, but he will be an upgrade defensively over both Ramon Sessions and Brian Roberts. So, both of those backup point guards, Ramon dealt with injuries last season, and they eventually had to rely on the services of Briante Weber, who, while he was great defensively, had trouble sort of basically running the offense. And I think with Michael Carter-Williams, you're going to get someone who has experience running an offense, has done it competently, falls in love with his three-point shot a little too much, but we know he can play defense. We know he can run an offense, and I think that's going to be an upgrade for the Charlotte Hornets at the backup point guard position.
He's going to be a name to watch in fantasy circles only if Kemba Walker goes down, because if he has to then step in and play 30 minutes a game, he is going to rebound the ball. He is going to get assists. He is going to get steals. He's going to get above average blocks for his position. And he's not going to score efficiently. We know that. But he is going to do those other things at a high rate. So he is a name to watch. That is, if you get an alert or anything happening on your phone that Kemba Walker's gone down and he's going to miss a week, then Carter-Williams is the guy that you immediately grab in that situation. rotation because of his ability. And we've seen it in the past when he's given those minutes, the stats will come. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good play, but they don't have another option here in Charlotte. He is going to have to step in and take those reins if anything does happen to Kemba Walker at any stage. David, they also brought in Julian Stone, who they eventually got him to get out of his contract over in Italy, I believe it was. I think he was signed to play there, but they got him out of that to be the third string point guard. What does he bring to the team? And could he be someone that maybe challenges Carter Williams for that backup role if MCW's injuries persist or his shot just doesn't do anything positive?
Yeah, gosh, that would be kind of a bad sign, I think, for MCW and the Hornets. I mean, especially given that the expectations. I mean, I don't know how much further down could MCW go than last year watching them in Chicago. I mean, they've got to be having for a bounce back year. But I think they like, maybe the upside in Julian Stone. He gives them another guy that's a little bigger, a little taller, certainly with Kemba Walker in the backcourt. They've been trying to add some length for several years now. And they brought in several veterans, to take a look at that third point guard spot and just didn't settle on any and decided to give Stone a chance, hoping maybe they could, get something out of him that someone else is not, or just take a flyer kind of on that third point guard spot. We don't anticipate him having to play those big minutes. I think Michael Carter-Williams is certainly the first choice for the backup. But, if Kemba Walker goes down for this team, you won't need any phone alerts. I mean, you'll be hearing screams of terror coming from Charlotte, North Carolina, from Hornets fans, because that will not be a good thing for anyone on the Hornets. But I think if Stone gets a shot, it will be certainly in limited minutes, definitely at a start. And they're just hoping that he can come in and provide some sort of stability and really just run the offense and not make any mistakes with his time in there. Kind of what they asked of Briante Weber last year, who was able to do it a little bit in stretches, but obviously not enough of what they liked.
They also brought in Marcus Page as a two-way guy who played for the Salt Lake Stars last year, Utah's D-League affiliate. So he's on a two-way contract. And they also brought in an Australian, I believe the first Australian to play for Charlotte. And I should know how to pronounce this, but I don't. David, how do I pronounce Mangok Mathiang?
Mango Mathiang.
Mango, silent K.
Yeah, silent K.
Mango Mathiang. All right, I should know that. He is Australian, and he is there on that two-way deal, him and Page. But as I've talked about in all the other shows, the two-way guys, they're not going to see the court really at all because they can only spend 45 days with an NBA team. So they need to be there for those 45 days and then find a spot in the rotation unless they get converted to a full-time contract, which would require an open roster spot. So not a lot to see with those guys. Doug, the guys that left this season, we have Marco Bellinelli going to the Hawks along with Miles Plumlee in that Howard trade. Sessions went to the Knicks, and then Christian Wood is unsigned. I think he's gone to Europe. Briante Weber to the Lakers, and Brian Roberts remains unsigned. Which of those players do you think is going to be the biggest loss, or are none of them really a loss for this team?
I think Marco Bellinelli for sure. I mean, they depended on him not only for clutch shooting, late game shooting, but also his ability to drive and move the basketball. He was just a really smart basketball player that Steve Clifford had coveted for a while and really seemed to enjoy coaching him. And they're going to have to look to guys like Jeremy Lamb and Malik Monk, the rookie, to come in and provide some of that outside shooting and general smarts that Marco Bellinelli was able to give to this offense. And they hope that, in those additions, they'll find a little bit more defense as well.
I like it when the guests are able to do the segues for me. So let's start talking about Malik Monk now, who comes in at pick number 11. I don't think many people thought that he would slip to that spot. So I guess you guys, as Hornets people covering the Hornets, you were pretty happy to see Monk there at pick 11. Or was there someone else you wanted them to select at that spot when Monk fell?
No, we were, I think, all pretty happy. We had earmarked a couple of guys in there. Oh my gosh, Doug helped me out. Louisville guard.
Oh yeah, Donovan Mitchell, Luke Kennard.
Sorry, yes. So those guys were guys we had earmarked, but I think that we had looked at Malik Monk as a pipe dream almost up until that pick happened. And shooting was an area this team was really hurt on last year. 2 years ago with Jeremy Lin in there, they had turned themselves into kind of a 3-point shooting team, and that went away a little bit last year. So that's why Kennard's name was popping up. But I think when Malik Monk fell, certainly they felt that the talent was too great to pass up there. And we were watching on draft night, and I think everyone in the room was was pretty ecstatic about that, just because of the some of the showcases he put on in the NCAA tournament, especially just his ability to shoot and make big shots. That's something that this team is trying to add for several years. Shot makers that can score the basketball, and I think that's what they're going to be asking of Malik Monk this year.
Doug, what do you see Monk's role as being? Do you think that he immediately steps in ahead of Jeremy Lamb, or does he have to sort of bide his time and then maybe by January? Because we know that Clifford's had issues with Lamb and trusting Lamb and putting him into lineups and pulling him out and playing him 20 minutes one night and then 7 minutes the next night and having real issues with his concentration at times. So do you think that Monk can step straight in to be that first guard off the bench or first wing off the bench?
I think a lot of it is going to depend on his training camp and the development that he will have post this, ankle injury that kept him out of summer league. It put him, a half step behind everyone else. And Coach Clifford has already made a point to mention how Jeremy Lamb finished in the second half of the season. And he did really well. His post All-Star break numbers, 10 points per game on 57.7% true shooting. And that's while shooting 31% from three. So he was physically stronger and a much better finisher around the rim. And he, proved that he could play an 82-game season. That was the big question 2 seasons ago. Could he keep up his performance, keep his body in check and ready to go for an 82-game season? He proved that, I think, to Coach Clifford and showed him a little something. So, no, I don't think it's a given that Malik Monk immediately takes that spot. But I think if Malik Monk comes in and proves that he can continue to be the knockdown shooter that he was in Kentucky, plus I think he has to show that, there's this sort of thing with Kentucky Wildcat wings and really a lot of players at Kentucky. They have this reputation of sort of sacrificing some part of their game to do what Calipari needs in exchange for, sort of playing at an NBA factory and the program getting them NBA ready near the end of their college season. So we're definitely seeing that with Devin Booker. So that would be a nice comp for Malik Monk's early game if he shows an ability to handle the ball that he didn't really get a chance to showcase at Kentucky. If he shows off some of that athleticism that we got little glimpses of when he wasn't, knocking down outside shots, then I think all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's clear when with Malik Monk you're getting that outside shooting, whereas with Jeremy Lamb, his outside shooting started to take a dip, and the Hornets will definitely, I think, look to Malik Monk if he, checks all of those boxes in training camp.
So what you said about those Kentucky guys is true. There's Booker. There's also Jamal Murray last year who played, strictly as an off-ball shooting guard in Kentucky, and now he's going to be the starting point guard for the Denver Nuggets. Karl Anthony Towns took, I think, 1-3 his entire season in Kentucky, and then he's a guy that can play as a stretch five. He hits those outside shots. Like, his game is different. So there are 3 guys in the last 3 drafts, really, that have shown way more pretty much immediately as soon as stepping into the NBA than what they saw at Kentucky. So Monk has that. That would be really helpful for his fantasy game, because at the moment we're just looking at him as really a source of 3, so a really nice streaming type of player. You got to think along the lines of someone like Nick Young last year, who you could add in and get maybe 2 threes a game in 20 minutes. That's what I think we can expect for Monk this year. But if he can add that ball handling and maybe add 3 assists a game or 2.5 assists a game and get some work on the defense and get the steal numbers up, then he does have a chance to rise up. But he's currently being considerably overdrafted. He's going at pick 104 in ESPN leagues and 136 in Yahoo, which 136 is fine because it's like your last pick. But I don't think anyone here, me or either of you two, will be expecting him to be playing 28 minutes a night, which is what he's going to need to really justify that sort of playing time. Could you see any situation, David, where he gets that large minute load at maybe even by December, and they push, say, Nick Batum down to the 3 and they force Michael Kidd-Gilchrist to the bench because of lack of spacing in the starting lineup?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of things that would have to happen, as you mentioned there, and even by December, I think it's just a little early, given Steve Clifford's track record, especially with young guys, and a little bit of the logjam they have there on the wing. I mean, if he can show that he would be able to handle any of the point guard duties, which again, that early in the game, I mean, it's just hard to imagine. I mean, it's not impossible, as we said. Guys from Kentucky and talented guys show stuff that we didn't necessarily see in college, but I think it would certainly be later in the season, if he were to prove himself in other areas where he would get that type of minutes. But that would be a significant load for a rookie, especially under Steve Clifford, given what we've seen of him in Charlotte, with his regime in Charlotte so far.
David, what do we?
Yeah, I think
Okay, sorry.
I think that Steve Clifford really loves to start a game with defense and really anchor his teams with defense. So, I could see a situation where he sacrifices that desire to go 4 out, 1 in. If Michael Kidd-Gilchrist doesn't develop that outside shot, I could see him doing that if the Hornets are a top 5 defensive team, if they are like elite defensively. But if they're a middle of the road team defensively like they were last season, and they're still not hitting outside shots, then I could certainly see them doing some kind of shakeup to get some spacing. And a lot of people are sort of salivating at a Kemba Walker, Malik Monk combo that gives a lot of people some thoughts about a Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. But that would be really tough defensively, I think, for the Charlotte Hornets to pair those two in the backcourt. But I think certainly Malik Monk and his comments have been inflating his draft stock in some of these fantasy drafts, because he keeps expressing his desire to be rookie of the year. And 4 out of the last 5 rookies of the year have averaged over 30 minutes per game, the exception being Malcolm Brogdon this past season. But, so he certainly, I think if he does get that opportunity to play, he's going to be aggressive. He's going to be confident, and he's going to look to take someone's spot. So Malik Monk is hungry.
He's someone to watch, especially through the preseason, because if we see these skills show out immediately, then you go, okay, well, there's something extra happening here, and we'll see the way that Clifford uses him. But he is someone that is more to watch. And again, if it's your last pick, that's fine. But I reckon there's going to be other guys that are better options at that last pick. But let's just see how he goes. But he will be a name to watch and a player to watch over those first few months to see exactly what he can provide. David, the other player they selected in the draft was Dwayne Bacon, who had his moments in Summer League. I think he had one really huge game, ended up averaging 15 points there down in Orlando in 29 minutes per game. Do you think that he's got any shot of being a regular rotation minute guy, or he's going to be seeing most of his season in Greensboro?
Oh, I think he'll be, in Charlotte, I think. That was some of our thoughts early on. Michael Jordan and Jordan Brand gave him a shoe contract, which you don't often see, from these second-year guys. Not that that's any indication of exactly what the team thinks of him, but it was just an interesting thing to see coming out of Summer League, where he did have a nice go of it, and we didn't see any Malik Monk. So I think what they liked about Bacon in the draft was they needed to add some more of these 3-and-D guys, some of these guys that could knock down shots and also guard multiple positions, which they did not have many of last year, and add some athleticism. So I think he's going to get, some chances in there. It's just going to have to be proven. He's going to have to show out when he does get those chances. It's going to be tough for him early on, I think, with guys like Lamb and Batum and Malik Monk in front of him. A bit of a logjam there. I don't know that he'll be in Greensboro that often, but it's going to be tough for him to crack that rotation, especially early on. Unless he just, again, continues to show out. I think he and Malik Monk both have the mentality of, I want to score all the time, which doesn't necessarily work out, but it's a good attitude to have for some of these young, hungry guys coming in. So we've seen a little more from him than we've seen from Malik Monk, but given that also he's a rookie and, he's got some other veteran guys in front of him, it is going to be tough for him to see consistent minutes, especially early on.
He also only shot 31% from 3 in his career at Florida State and 20% from 3 in Summer League. So if he wants to be a 3-and-D guy, he probably needs to hit some threes to do that. So he's got a long way to go. But he did show a little bit more in Summer League than I was expecting him to, so that's always a positive there. Now, Doug, Kemba Walker, I've heard some people talking about Kemba Walker's been, he's been really, durable, and he has played games, but it feels like every year he has something done to his knee, and he's had another knee procedure done this off-season. What is happening with his knee, and how worried should we be as he gets older, as he continually has these knee concerns or knee procedures in pretty much every off-season, it feels like?
Yeah, he did have off-season knee surgery to repair a torn meniscus in his left knee, and that's his second surgery in as many years on that left knee to repair that meniscus. So, as you said, the questions are, will long-term effects begin to show and slow him down as he heads to the end of this contract? It's a crucial period in his career, and the thing about Kemba Walker is that he needs every bit of his amazing quickness, his ability to change directions and to get by defenders on ball because of his limited size. So, obviously, He's developed a three-point shot, and that's important. That's something that he doesn't necessarily need that quickness to get to, because he showed an amazing ability last season to hit those three-point shots with defenders on his hip, coming around that screen and pulling up immediately. So he has some tools in his tool belt now that could possibly extend his career past that point where he starts to slow down a little bit. But, to be that all-star level offensive player, I think he absolutely has to have those knees 100%. The team doesn't seem to be all that concerned about it. They thought it was sort of a routine thing. And we know with these knee injuries, sometimes it's kind of once you sort of cross that barrier, cross that threshold with these knee injuries, sometimes it just does require a little bit of maintenance as your career goes on. But they absolutely need him. As David said, if he were to go down for any extended period of time, I think it would probably be, over for the Hornets in terms of their season, because he is the team's best player, unquestioned. He is their go-to offensive threat. He is their heart and soul, and he has been their most, clutch shot maker and best pick and roll ball handler in the league. He averaged 12 points per game in those situations, and that led the league just above James Harden, Damian Lillard, DeMar DeRozan, and Russell Westbrook. So they need that from him and hope that injury doesn't slow him down.
I've been a fan of Kemba for a long time, but the way that he's been able to transform himself over the last two seasons has been fantastic. From a guy that couldn't hit shots to being a knockdown three-point shooter that's scoring efficiently. He's doing everything, and he's a solid guy to pick at the end of the second round, start of the third round in fantasy drafts. But that knee does bother me. Now, he's not old. He's only 27, but he's getting to that stage where if he continually has knee surgery every off-season, that in 2 years' time he could be in a lot of trouble just because of his smaller stature, the explosiveness, and if you just keep having those knee surgeries as you push towards 30, that is something to watch. That's more for people in longer-term dynasty leagues when you're just looking at maybe when do I cash out on my Kemba Walker stock and where can I get most value, because these are things that are starting to build up. But for now, he's rock solid at that value at where he currently sits. But it is something that we do need to keep in mind. David, last year, Frank Kaminsky, from a fantasy point of view especially, like he did take some steps forward when Cody Zeller went out. He started putting up good numbers, like really good numbers, and he was like a must-add player at that point. But the Hornets struggled significantly when he was playing at center. We head into his third season now. What do we make of Kaminsky heading into this third season? Is there a chance he pushes Marvin Williams for more minutes at power forward, and that minutes sort of split moves more in Kaminsky's favor? Because I believe it was like 28 to 26 last year. Could he take the starting job? Could he get more minutes? Will they ever play him at center again after last season? Like, what's in store for Kaminsky this season?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think he's definitely going to have to hit that three-point shot with more consistency, which he did at times, last year, especially after the All-Star break, shooting 38% from three. And he had a couple of stretches there where he was really on fire and was good for them. But I think when you're comparing him to Marvin and what this staff has liked from Marvin Williams since he's been here, is that he gives them so much across the board, and they ask so much of Marvin Williams from a rebounding perspective, from a defensive perspective. He's really the quarterback out there on defense. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist gets a lot of the defensive talk, but Clifford's often talked about the best team defensive player for them being Marvin Williams, and I think they ask a lot for him. And it's just going to take, I think, a significant step forward from Kaminsky, showing that shot, showing himself to be able to give a little resistance on defense, at least from a team perspective, and probably Marvin taking a bit of a step back. I mean, I think a lot of people were looking for that when the draft pick was made, and especially going into last year, looking for Frank to show some of what he did in college, being that go-to guy. But again, I think Marvin's just going to have to take a step back, and Frank's going to have to take a significant step forward in consistency to be able to overtake him. Now, could they, see more of a minute share? I mean, that's possible. But like I said, they lean on Marvin Williams so much still, even at his advanced age, that he would have to decline, I think, and start to hurt things on the floor for Frank to get at least the starting spot.
The strange thing, I guess, with Marvin Williams last year is he did start to regress. He did start to decline for the first 3 months of the season, and then for the second half of the season, it was just forget about that. Let's just go back to what we did the year before, and everything was fantastic. It was a really weird turnaround, because when you see a guy that's 30, 31, who put up a career best year the year before and then starts struggling and go, well, here we go. Here's the start of the decline. But then after 3 months, it was just reversed. His field goal percentage went back up. His defensive stats returned, which had all disappeared. And I think we can see a relative level of consistency from Williams this year. But as for Kaminsky, he is getting overdrafted. He's getting picked at pick 109 and pick 108 on Yahoo and ESPN respectively. And that's way too high for me for a guy that's not in a set big minute role or even close to 30-minute role, and is going to lack those defensive stats and is going to be a poor field goal percentage guy as he's been for the first 2 years. I think that's way too high to take Kaminsky. Totally fine for a last pick if you think that he's going to overtake Williams, but it doesn't appear that will be the case for him this season. So I think that's probably just a little bit rich for him there. Batum, Doug, he was, I guess some people were a little bit disappointed with what he did last season. In the fantasy community, he has an extraordinarily negative opinion of him amongst many people. Not the people that listen to this show because they're well informed and they know what they're talking about. But the general fantasy community, like I got into an argument with someone the other day. Like, should I take Batum at pick 40? And someone said, well, if you want someone to miss at least 15 to 20 games every year, then take him. And that's just like Batum has the most games he's missed in the last 8 years is 10 or maybe 12. Like, so it's just false. But people just have this thing that he's just going to miss all these games and he's going to be terrible. When in effect, he just gives you top 50 numbers every single season. So what did you think of him last year? Did you think there was somewhat of a step back? And can it be corrected if there was?
Well, I think his 2 seasons in Charlotte represent his 2 highest usage percentage seasons, but his efficiency numbers are way down from his best years in Portland. So he still hasn't been able to sort of negotiate higher efficiency offense mixed with a larger role that you have to have as a max level player, as one of the top players on your team. Also, his late game turnovers became an issue last season and cost him a chance at several of those close games that I mentioned. So I think all of those things have to rectify themselves. And to Nick Batum's credit, he seemed to, after the season, recognize that there were moments, games, where he should have been the one to step up and take the reins offensively and knock down some shots when he needed to knock them down. And basically, when Kemba wasn't having a great night, step up. And I think he was a little too passive at times. He spent a lot of time in Charlotte over the offseason trying to improve his game. And I think he sees this as a very crucial season. But whatever his offensive efficiency numbers are, he makes so many players better with his passing. The problem is that when you're on a team with few knockdown shooters and star offensive weapons, his inability to create his own efficient offense tended to stick out like a sore thumb. So yeah, he's definitely going to have to improve that, and I expect him to, because I think he's recognized it. Yeah, he didn't play internationally this offseason, which is something he hasn't done since he was a teenager. I'm sure David was about to mention that and make me realize that I had forgotten it, but I didn't, David. So there.
Yeah, I was going to say that was a big thing because we have followed up. We've been following the French national team for like the past 3 years. But yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. And he's talked about it a lot this summer. I believe he stayed in Charlotte a lot and wanted to be here with the team. So I know they're looking forward to him being back and see that as a positive thing. And, Josh, you mentioned that. I mean, he's across the board. He's going to give you the points, assists, and rebounds if he can get those percentages back up a little bit. I mean, he's certainly a value.
Now, Doug, you mentioned that it stood out like a sore thumb, and that just triggered in my head an Aussie expression. I don't know if you guys even use it in America. I'm going to introduce you to it. If we say something like that, we can say a little bit more cruder, but we would say it stands out like dog's balls. So that's immediately what. That's immediately what came into my head. So I didn't think you guys would have heard that, but that's something that you can just try and drop into a casual conversation and have people look at you going, "What are you talking about?" But that's what I would have said. Stuck out like dog's balls. The other thing is that Batum led the Hornets in assists per game last year. And I don't think everyone would be totally across that. And he's got a chance to do that again. That's where his value comes from. He can be a 5.5 rebound, 5.5 assist, over a steal, half a block, 2 threes, 15 points. And David, as you said, if he gets the field goal percentage up even to 43%, you're talking about a guy that then vaults into the top 35. So he's a very, very solid mid-round pick. And I don't think if you're looking in those mid-rounds, you should be avoiding him for any whatever made-up bullshit stories that are around him missing games. Like he'll go through a streak where he'll have like a bad week of games, and he'll like have games where he shoots 20%. And I will get multiple people ask me, "Oh, I need to cut Batum." I go, just calm down. Like he had 3 bad games, and you're ready to cut him because he only scored 6 points in each of those games. But people get really onto his back, and I always stress this, that there are players that people have a really irrational negativity about, and that's where you should target those guys in trades when that level of play dips a little bit, then you can get them for nothing. And Batum is always the number one example to me in that that situation.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt you. He's going to be out there. I mean, this team depends on him so much. The uptick in Kemba Walker's progression can be traced right back to when Nick Batum showed up. Certainly, Kemba deserves a lot of that credit, but he is such a big part of this team and such a key cog in what they do that he's going to have the minutes, he's going to have the opportunities. And, yeah, you look back at his career, he's going to have the production too. So were any of those folks you talked to, were they from Charlotte? Or because we've heard there's a lot of frustration going around.
I don't know where they were from. They could have been from this, but this is even going back to his Portland days. Like back when he was in Portland, he was doing the same stuff. It's just maybe it's because he punched that guy in the dick in the Olympics a few years ago that people have just got an irrational hatred of him. I don't know what it is, but there's something about Batum that people just have this issue with.
And I think especially when he came here, people wanted him to transform into a 20 point per game scorer, right, and make that jump because he was going from third or fourth option to maybe being second. And I just don't think that's in his arsenal. I mean, he's going to provide things across the board, and that's where you find the value.
Yeah. Right, David, but I think he got in trouble, and he sort of admitted this late in the season. He got in trouble because I think he was trying to stay so much within himself and not sort of go towards that tendency to take over as a scorer that it hurt the Hornets at times. In fact, he got in trouble with his wife. His wife at one point told him, Nick, you got to start playing like Nick Batum. And so, he's going to have to be careful not only to not make the fans mad, the coaching staff mad, but keep things happy at home and become a more efficient offensive player.
I hope that there is no issues with his wife, because actually his worst season was the season when he was having, and I don't know if this is his second wife, because I think he split up from his first wife, or that was separated, and that's when he had his worst season, which was that last season in Portland, and he admitted that was a real problem. So let's hope for that his wife is not going at him too hard for his poor play, because that obviously has an impact on him. We just got to really get deep into the weeds here. I hope that's not going to be a problem.
Listen, we're always hoping that people's wives take it easy on them. Yeah. So we're both married, so yeah, we get it.
Michael Kidd-Gilchrist played last season, because that's a start. Didn't have the shoulder problems, but where is he? Where is he, David, in his career? Do you think that the issue of having Howard, Williams, Kidd-Gilchrist playing together is going to really cramp things up for Walker and Batum? Is his defense still at a high enough level to make up for his lack of offense, especially in a crowded paint situation that we might be getting this season? Like, where is he? It feels like he's at a bit of a crossroads.
For sure. And I think that spacing issue is a big thing they're going to be looking at, because, I mean, that's a big question mark. And everything surrounding Dwight Howard, of course, is a big question mark, especially for this team. But like you mentioned, played 81 games last year, started 81 games last year, which would have been unheard of before it actually happened. I don't think he's ever going to, quote unquote, develop this jumper, if you can put air quotes around that, for a professional basketball player. I just don't know that is going to ever be a reliable part of his game. I do think that last year he was still getting back, whether it be from, full on injury recovery or more of from a mental standpoint. I think there was still some recovery going on while he was playing last year. And I say that just to say I think he's back at full strength this year. I think that expectation is there for him. And the production from him, with rebounding, and maybe, he's never really been a strong assist guy, but doing other things besides scoring, or at least being able to score when he got the opportunity inside, I think you'll see, I would hope you would see an uptick in that this year, because I think this will be the first year where he's had, fully healthy season behind him. He can go into this season and hopefully stay healthy as well. I just don't think he's ever going to give you much on the offensive end at all. So if he can give you some other things in those other categories, that's what you're looking for. But for me, I think they're expecting an uptick in consistency across the board this year just by being fully healthy.
He was able
the Hornets got
Go ahead, Doug.
I was just gonna say the Hornets got 81 games of Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, but did they get the full Michael Kidd-Gilchrist experience? I think that MKG, admitted after the season that it was like his rookie year all over again, because as David was saying, he was sort of learning how to play with this shoulder, and I think there was a little bit of this like almost playing careful or not. When you change. When you're a guy like MKG and you throw your body all around the court and you give it, you go 150% every game, if there's a slight adjustment in that, I think it can throw, sort of your entire game off. And I think you got a little bit of that with Michael Kidd-Gilchrist last season. But at the same time, he averaged 7 rebounds a game. That was, top 10 in the league for his position. And I wonder, with Dwight Howard's addition, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, will that start to affect his rebounding numbers when Dwight Howard gobbles up a few of those loose rebounds? But also, will the Hornets decide to send Michael Kidd-Gilchrist back on defense and get back to being that elite transition defense that they've been known for in previous years and sort of let go last season?
What he was able to do last season as well in terms of his defense, he was able to turn his defense into statistical defense for fantasy and averaged a steal a game, averaged 0.9 blocks, where in his last full season, which was a 55-game season, he was at 0.5 and 0.7. So there's significant increases. But one thing, Doug, I do want to ask you about is when he came back from that shoulder injury in 15-16, he played those 7 games. And in those 7 games, he took 7 3-point attempts, so 1 per game. He hit 3 of them. We thought, okay, he's feeling more confident in his 3-point shot. We're not expecting him to hit 43%, but the fact that he took 1 a game was interesting. Last year, he played 81 games and took 9 3-point attempts. So that's 2 more than he did in the season before in 74 more games. So what happened in either that 7-game stretch where he decided, I'm just launching threes for whatever reason, as opposed to last season where he said, well, I'm just not taking any ever again? Like, what changed there?
I think it's all mental. I think he came into those first 5 or 6 games really aggressive with his offense, and it didn't go well for him. He did not have a great start to the season offensively. And, Marvin Williams didn't either, but Marvin had sort of that history of being able to do things offensively, shoot outside shots. You have that sort of muscle memory that you can rely on and say, well, I'm in a bit of a rut right now, but I'll get back to the way I've been known to play. But Michael Kidd-Gilchrist doesn't really have that. He's having to develop this, in year 4 and 5 from scratch. And you also have to mention the fact that he's changed shooting coaches multiple times and changed his shot multiple times. And so there's a little bit of this, not having that consistency, not having that history, that muscle memory to be able to rely on. And I think he just went away from it because there was this fear that suddenly you go 0 for 6 and then you go 0 for 13 and then you go 0 for 21 and all of a sudden it's a disaster, and instead decided to back off of it a little bit.
You said that he started off more aggressive offensive, so I had a look. He took 2 threes in his first game out of his 9 total for the entire season. He took 3 3-pointers in his first 7 games. So for the remainder of the last 74 games, he took just 6 threes, and the last 3 he actually attempted was on the 25th of February. So that just shows that he did lose that confidence. Now, one other thing that happened with him last year is that Clifford would often take him off the court in the fourth quarters and play Marco Bellinelli ahead of him, with Clifford's insistence that we want more offense out there in the fourth quarter. With Bellinelli gone, do you think that we're going to see more Kidd-Gilchrist closing games, or will we see Lamb move into that Bellinelli closer role, or potentially Monk later on in the season, or do you think that Kidd-Gilchrist will get that another chance to be a closer?
I mean, unless he develops an offensive game, I think Clifford likes to start with defense and end with offense. So I think you're going to see some of these offensive weapons in Lamb and Malik Monk close games.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. I mean, it's going to come a lot down to Lamb, right? I mean, had multiple chances and is still going to have chances, but that's going to be probably maybe a key question of the season, like who closes those games out. If MKG can give them anything, they would like to stay with them, but it's just such a black hole at times with not being able to give them much at all on offense. It's tough to stay on the floor.
But Dwight Howard sort of changes all of the equations. I mean, if he can get back to 2 blocks a game, if he can become, a defensive presence inside and make this team a top 3 defense. And suddenly, maybe you're not winning games, 110 to 108, but suddenly you're winning games, 98 to 84, and you've got a comfortable lead because your defense is just able to stifle the competition. Then maybe MKG does get some of those minutes in the fourth quarter.
David, who would be your breakout candidate on this team? You can use whatever criteria you want for breakout candidate.
Breakout guy. Well, I had a couple guys that we had already talked about. I mean, I would just lean back on Frank Kaminsky a little bit. And I know I talked about him not being able to overtake Marvin Williams. I just think, going into this year, he needs to be a breakout player. They're going to ask him to improve on what he did last year. And like I said, he showed flashes of being able to hit that 3 consistently. They're going to ask it of him again. I mean, if anybody is in that role, and I kind of take Monk and Bacon out of this just being rookies, because I think Malik Monk, as you mentioned, with the, where he's being drafted, is going to have, is going to be a popular pick. But, I mean, I think Frank is a guy they're asking to be a breakout guy. And so I think if he can improve the 3-point percentage, he could possibly be a key in some of these wins.
Doug, which way do you lean?
Yeah, I'll stick with Frank Kaminsky as well. His 11.7 points, 4 point, what?
This is not good.
His 11.7 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 2.2 assists were just good enough to earn him honors of most average player in the NBA, according to StatMuse. And I just wonder, I'll certainly ask about this, but I certainly wonder if Frank will use that as I would use that as a little chip on my shoulder, like, oh, how dare you call me average, and use that as motivation to sort of break out and prove that in year 3, he can, year 4, can he take that post All-Star breakout that he had in year 3 and use it to have his next step. He started 9 of 11 games in February. That was because the Hornets traded away 2 of their centers. Zeller went down with an injury, so he got some chance to play center. He averaged 18 points per game on 38.6% three-point shooting in the month of February. So he's proven that he has, the tool set to do that. So he's not going to get a chance to play center with Dwight Howard and Johnny O'Bryant on the team now. I think that ship has sailed. But if he can take that, and a lot of Frank Kaminsky is mental, and that's from the coaching staff. Like, they've admitted that, like, Frank gets in his own head a little bit. So can he in year 4 finally say, look, I have a month in February of last season where I dominated, and I can do that and take that into this season. We'll have to see.
That's why.
Yeah, and I think, Josh, when you look at this roster, like, he almost gets that by default, because you kind of know what you have in Lamb and the other starters. You kind of know what you have in him. Kemba's going to be there for you. We've talked about Batum. Frank's the guy that still could maybe push himself a little bit and get more consistent and get a little better. When you got the rookies in the mix too. But I mean, he's really the only guy that we think we may be able to see a little more from. So I think he's the kind of the logical choice there.
What you said there, Doug, about him in February, that's why fantasy people were all over him last year, and that's why I think his average draft position is as high as it is at 109 and 108, because he was putting up those numbers in February and everyone was all over him. But then it obviously dropped back when Zeller returned. People were thinking that there was people in the fantasy community and people that would interact with me that when Zeller's coming back on, Frank's going to keep the starting job. Look at how many points he's scored. He's going to stay there. I was like, no, that's not what's going to happen. Like, Zeller's going to come back and he's going to do what he needs to do.
Hell no, Clifford.
Yeah, like that's not what's going to happen. So that's why I think his value is inflated. If I look at this roster in general, in terms of value fantasy guys you can get as sort of sleepers, I don't think there's really many guys, which is a weird thing to say for a team that's not high up in the national spotlight, which is often the way some of these average draft positions go. You see the teams like the Cavs and the Lakers have guys that have extremely inflated values, and you can never get much value, whereas teams often like the Hornets tend to be a little bit undervalued. But that's not the case this year. Like, Batum's coming in at pick 50, which is fine, and Walker's at 24 and 26, which is right where they need to go, and Williams at 120 is okay, and Zeller at 140 is fine. And then you got Monk a bit too high and Kaminsky too high. But the one I really want to focus on is Dwight, who's getting picked at pick 65 on Yahoo and ESPN. And if you're in a head-to-head league, that actually represents value. But if you're in a rotisserie league, it's a terrible pick. because of the free throws. So Dwight's a guy that if you're looking at in a head-to-head league and you're going to be punting free throws, we think he's going to be playing enough minutes to actually retain that value and provide you with elite rebounding, elite field goal percentage, maybe get those blocks up if his back responds, and then 65 is a decent spot to be taking him. So maybe he's the guy in certain situations that we could extract some value out of from a fantasy point of view. David, Vegas released some over-unders today. We did have some early ones, but they released the new ones today. So I'm going to get both of you guys to give me your take on whether you think the Hornets are going over-under. Vegas has them at 42.5 wins, and Kevin Pelton of ESPN has them projected at 44 wins. So, David, are you going over-under 42.5?
Yeah, I'm going over on that one. I think this happens, it's a year-on, year-off thing, right? Like Vegas is off one year, then they're on the next year, and that's kind of the Hornets have been. But I think especially in the East with the additions they've made and expecting some of these guys like Batum and even Marvin Williams to kind of bounce back and have more consistency, I think they have to, if they want to get to where they want to be, which is, winning a playoff series or at least getting back into the playoffs. They've got to be aiming higher than that 42 wins. So I think we're looking at over.
Doug, sorry.
Yeah, I'll take the over as well, and mainly because I think this season they've been able to add reliable depth. I think last offseason they added unreliable depth, and they were really hoping that guys like Roy Hibbert would sort of have a bit of a reclamation project, and it didn't work out, and all those pieces started to fall at the same time, and then guys got injured, and then all of a sudden Cody Zeller is your most important player because you've got nobody behind him that could pick up the slack. And so that's why, they lost close games, and that's why eventually they fell out of the playoff race. But I think this season, even though Dwight Howard isn't the Dwight Howard of Orlando, he's still a double-double guy. They've got reliable depth this season, and that's why I think they can get back to the playoffs.
I agree with both of you. I would be taking the over on that, and I think they will be back in the playoffs as well. They were disappointing last season. I thought they could have a real sort of not bounce back type of season, but a real improvement last year. Didn't happen, but I think we see that correct itself this season. So yeah, I'm with you guys and taking the over. Now, Doug, have you got anything you need to plug? What's coming up on Locked On Hornets, or your Twitter handle, or anything else that's happening that you wanna get out there to everyone that listens to this podcast?
Absolutely. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hornets. Visit us on Patreon, patreon.com/LOH, and you can help keep our hive alive. For just $1 a month, you get extra content on Locked On Hornets. It's a great way to sponsor the local journalism that you love. We've got a lot of great. This is going to be the biggest season of Locked On Hornets yet. And if you haven't checked out our interview with General Manager Rich Cho, go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/Locked On Hornets. But yeah, we go back to 5 days a week starting second week of September 11th. So set your calendars, Hornets fans. We're back to 5 days a week, getting ready for training camp and what we hope will be a bounce back season for the Charlotte Hornets.
That is all great stuff. So go and support those guys. Check them out, YouTube, or wherever you find all your podcasts. Check out their Patreon as well. And David, have you got anything that you want to plug yourself?
I'll plug myself all day. We'll go to my Twitter handle. You can communicate with me on Twitter at David B. Walker. That's B as in Bobcats. And we can talk shoes and Twin Peaks and Beverly Hills 90210, and we can even talk some NBA.
There you go. Go and go follow David. Go follow Locked On Hornets. Go follow Doug and interact with him for all your Twin Peaks, shoes, Hornets information that you need. They're covering the entire gamut there. So thanks, guys, for coming on. Thanks, David.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No problem. Doug, thank you for coming back.
Well, thank you for teaching us sort of Aussie.
Yeah,
they're not really curse words, but they're pretty sweet. We got some Aussie fans with Locked On Hornets, so they're going to be happy to hear this.
Yes, you just need to just slide that into an episode at some point, and you'll have 95% of your people saying, "What are you talking about?" And then you'll have the Aussie just send you, "Mate, love it, love."
They do that
love
anyway.
The Dogs Balls
they do
reference.
that anyway.
All right. Follow me on Twitter at redrock_bball and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, on TuneIn, on Google Play, on Stitcher, and on Spotify, and leave a review if you're so inclined. 5 stars always helps, and it is a great way of supporting the podcast. You can check out my Patreon as well at patreon.com/redrock_bball. Guys, thank you once again.
Thanks, Josh.
Absolutely. Thanks, Josh.
All right, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.
All right, thanks, Josh. We appreciate it, buddy.
Frank Kaminsky.